So right now we're going to take a break from all the insane news in college football and focus in on the Crimson Tide because we need to talk about Crimson Tide recruiting news, transfer portal news, and then our final takeaways on the Iron Bowl before we turn our attention to the SEC championship game in the Georgia Bulldogs. So, before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I want to hear from you. Hop down to the comments, give me a Y for yes or an N for no. And were you amazed at how Alabama pulled out that victory against Auburn last weekend? And let me know what you're thinking. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell notification. I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoyed this content, be sure to like and comment down below. Those interactions are massive to content creators such as myself, in both getting picked up and maintained by the YouTube algorithm. But with all that being said, let's hop straight into this, and I want to start off on the recruiting and transfer news. And we'll start with recruiting, because as National Signing Day is approaching, at least early National Signing Day, the Crimson Tide got fantastic news yesterday because five-star corner out of Mater Dei, California, Domani Jackson has announced that his top two is the Crimson Tide and the USC Trojans, to where he just decommitted from. Now, this is interesting and not totally surprising, especially with the Trojans making the splash hire they did, which has caused all the chaotic news in college football, but that has generated a ton of hype for the Trojans. Now, I've said this before, hype is awesome when you're talking about college football recruiting. It is a great base to have, but it is just that. It is a base, and things must be shown. Now, unfortunately for USC in this situation, you're hoping you can make up enough ground in late terms of this recruiting process. And sure, you had a great position throughout the entirety of Domani Jackson's recruiting process. That's why he was ultimately committed to the Trojans. But since his decommitment, Alabama has put themselves in a really unique place, and right now, at least with Alabama, there's some more continuity going there with the staff than there is at USC, not to mention the history Alabama has at sending guys at his position to the NFL, and those guys finding success. And then not even to talk about the news that came out last night with Roy Manning, something that we're going to have to keep our eye on because that could be a major story in college football. I don't expect anything to really come about it from the NCAA, but it is just one of the wilder storylines going around right now in college football, and because of that, it deserves to be watched. For those not familiar, Domani Jackson in his 24/7 Sports interview hinted at the fact that former Oklahoma cornerback coach Roy Manning had been talking to him. The problem is, Roy Manning is still a coach at the University of Oklahoma, and the way it made it sound is that Roy Manning, while on trips recruiting for the Sooners, is also texting prospects and recruiting for USC, which that's why I said it's an incredibly just wild storyline, something we're going to have to keep up with. But because of all that attention, and not good attention, because of all that negative attention, I have to wonder if that hurts USC's chances and amplifies Alabama's chances. We will find out very shortly. But now let's talk about the transfer portal as it pertains to the Crimson Tide, because just earlier today I talked about the Oklahoma Sooners' precarious situation with the portal. And the Crimson Tide's is not that serious. In fact, the Crimson Tide up to this point have two new players entering that we know of, and that is Pierce Quick, the offensive lineman, and Jackson Bratton, the linebacker. Now, both of these are hits. Both of these are very quality individuals. Pierce Quick was a top 50 player in the nation coming out of high school in his respective class at the offensive line position, and an individual that many expected to see the field more than he did. And in fact, this year was his least action he's had. On the other front, Jackson Bratton is someone who didn't see the field at all, except in the Crimson Tide spring game, and many of you actually highlighted to me how impressed you were about Bratton, and I have to agree, he played a really solid game. So, both of these individuals, wish them nothing but the best. Hopefully they find a location to where they can showcase their talents and have a successful career in college football. But now, I want to talk about some injury news and my final takeaways from the Iron Bowl, because what an Iron Bowl it was. It's incredible to think that as long as that game has been played, it's never gone to overtime. That right there was amazing to me, because this is one of the more incredible rivalries in college football, and the fact that this was the first overtime was pretty cool. Luckily, the Crimson Tide came out victorious in that situation, because it had been a shame to lose the first ever overtime against Auburn. But it was the way that game was won. And Bryce Young has had a sensational season all year long. But if you were looking for the Heisman moment, I don't know of a better Heisman moment than that last drive he led Alabama down the field. Less than 2 minutes left in the game, no timeouts, and 98 yards to go, and he was flawless. Look, when the moment was the biggest, Bryce Young shined the most, and that's the thing that was so incredible. Auburn was hyper successful at mitigating Alabama's offense through 3.5 quarters of that game. But when crunch time happened, Alabama and Bryce Young turned it on, and they were sensational. Now look, that's not to say that there's not things to take away from this game, or certainly things to improve on before Georgia. Absolutely there are things to improve on. But this is a very talented team, and even though there are things to improve on, the way they won that game was incredible. It was so much fun to watch, and I'm just incredibly glad none of you could hear me in my house when he made that throw to Ja'Cory Brooks in the end zone, the touchdown, to send him into overtime. Because I scared everybody in my neighborhood. I was yelling so loud. It was awesome to see, and then the way overtime happened. The Iron Bowl is a special game. These rivalry games are special games, and that's why I was so excited for last Saturday in particular, with Bedlam, with Ohio State, Michigan, and then the Iron Bowl. As a college football fan, you just don't get better than that. You really don't. And then when you looked at how everything happened, I'm not going to lie, as an Alabama fan, the day seemed to be pointing to the fact that everybody's getting upset out here. OU lost to Oklahoma State, and even though Oklahoma State was ranked higher, OU has largely dominated that matchup. Michigan downed Ohio State for the first time in Harbaugh's tenure. An Ohio State team that people were really intrigued about their potential, and Michigan really handled them. That running attack they yielded was impressive. So with those two results and the craziness the Iron Bowl brings out regardless, it had all the makings for a Tide upset. But the Tide would not be denied, and everybody's calling it the disaster in the pasture, and that, I think, is an apt name for what happened. Because we all need to be very cognizant and honest here. The Crimson Tide certainly have things to improve on before they face Georgia, and some of these things may just be the Tide this year. But this is still a really, really, really talented team. They've got playmakers all over the field, and they were able to beat Auburn without their best wide receiver, Jamison Williams, and freshmen had to step up and make plays. John Mechie had to step up and make plays. Slade Bolden stepped up and made plays, and that's awesome to see. At the end of the day, you want to win in style. You want to win good. But winning against your rival is huge, and the manner in which the Tide did, fighting back the way they did, taking it into overtime, and then winning the game was awesome to see. Now, defensively, we've talked about Alabama's offense and how I think Bryce Young just had his Heisman moment. And if I had to vote tonight, I'd give the award to Bryce Young. And if I wasn't giving it to Bryce Young, call me a homer, I'm giving it to Will Anderson. Because Will Anderson has been on an incredible tear this year. Look at his numbers. Look at what he did as a freshman. Look what he's doing as a sophomore. And now just imagine what he's going to do next year. The kid gets better and better every time he steps onto the football field, and he cannot be denied. His production this year is incredible, and when we're talking about the Heisman is for the best player. The Heisman is for the guy that means that much to his team. And I pose you this question, Alabama fans or fans of college football in general. How much does Will Anderson mean to this Alabama defense? And by extension, how much does Will Anderson mean to this Alabama team? Because I think the answer is a tremendous amount. And I think that if you're really looking for it and you don't even want to watch the games, listen to Nick Saban. Listen to how he talks about Will Anderson. And I think that tells you everything you need to know. But outside of just saying Will Anderson absolutely deserves to be in New York for the Heisman, it will be a travesty if he isn't. We need to talk about Alabama's defense because they played a great game against Auburn, even though Auburn didn't have their starting quarterback. The whole time, they kept Alabama in position. And this was a defense that we were getting after a week before. And they answered the call. They played a solid game. They played with an intensity, they played with a chip, and they were able to keep the Crimson Tide in this game and ultimately help lead the Crimson Tide to victory. And so yes, I've said it a few times in this video. Things must be improved upon before Georgia. Can they be improved upon? I'm not sure. I do know we've seen the Crimson Tide play phenomenal football this year and then just show inconsistencies. So I do know the talent is there. I know the ability is there to make that game against Georgia a great game. But things must be consistent, and Alabama must play their A game. But at the end of the day, if we're just simply talking about the Iron Bowl, what an Iron Bowl it was. The last thing I'll end this video with is some injury news. Brian Robinson's leg injury is something that we're going to have to keep an eye on. At the very least, we do know it means we're going to see a heavy dose of Trey Sanders, which in fairness, he played a great game against Auburn. A really, really great game, and I'm so excited to see him get his opportunity because he's been through so much. So hop down in the comments, let me know what you're thinking. That's it. See ya.